Alright, so I turn the light on. That helps. So, there is the standard bracket location, accessory bracket locations. This should look pretty standard to anybody with a CPI 4.3. And I'm pretty confident that this bracket would work with a 96 up where you have an alternator where this compressor is, because you can mount an alternator where this compressor is on this vehicle. So it should be a very similar swap in that case. And the second alternator's down here. All I did was run the serpentine belt from the bottom of the pulley around the alternator and then back to the idler pulley, up to the compressor, etc. The problem with this setup is when I'm under a huge electrical load, the belt is feeding the alternator. So when the alternator puts drag, it stretches the belt out and it gets really loose right in front of the pulley going to the alternator, and it basically slips. So I had to pull my matching DR44G 150 amp alternator from the auxiliary position, and I mounted a CS130, which is a 105 amp, roughly 60 amps at idle alternator, but I put a bigger or a smaller pulley on this one to overdrive it a bit. I do occasionally get a belt squeal, so I'm going to probably end up having to go with the bigger pulley, the stock pulley for this. I think that's going to make all the difference. Ultimately, this alternator just can't put enough drag on the serpentine system how it is with its limited output compared to the larger alternator that can. So with the big one over here and the little guy over here, I should still be doing about 160 amps at idle at about 650 RPM, give or take. And then that's a hot idle according to all the research I've done. And I think at 1800 engine RPMs, these guys are both at wide open, so this one should be doing about 100 amps and this one will be doing about 150. So that's my issue. I would love to install a tensioner between the crank pulley and the alternator pulley. I just haven't really devised a method. So yeah, this is the Smog bracket. So this is the same bracket that you can get off of any TBI, possibly carbureted small block Chevrolets. I just went to the junkyard and of the 50 vehicles I looked at, I found 2 brackets. I mangled the first one, learned from that, and then made this one. With this small alternator, you pretty much don't have to do anything but drill the holes out in the correct location. I believe one set of holes you have to drill. It's going to be, I think it's going to be on the bottom side. You have to kind of, really just have to oval the hole out a little bit larger, and the top one is okay. One thing I did learn was, I can turn this sideways, I had an alignment issue. The stock pulley brings the belt about 2 millimeters closer to the alternator, which doesn't sound like much, but when it's bunching up like I had before with the large alternator, it made a pretty big difference, I think. So I happened to find this pulley on an 80-144, so you'll have to Google these numbers. And this one sticks out a few more millimeters, so I really like this pulley. I'm going to be kind of disappointed when I go and put the stock larger pulley on this alternator, but I don't know that it will make much of a difference ultimately once everything is said and done. So all I did was, this is kind of crammed in here because this is an S10. There's the alternator's output, and all I did was tap into this alternator's, it is the ignition circuit. These are labeled PLIS. So the I circuit, I just tapped into from the harness from this alternator and ran it to this alternator so that the computer energizes the 2 alternators when it's time. But you have to run a second wire to a light. I happen to have one to tell me when the fans are on that I no longer was using. So that's what I use. So whenever this alternator, when you key on, this alternator trips the light in my car, so I know that the auxiliary alternator's ready to go. And then once I start the truck, the light goes out when the alternator turns on. That light's actually hooked up to a switch, so when I hit the switch off, this alternator is disabled, which helped diagnostics tremendously as well. I haven't noticed any performance differences between the 2 alternators. And with the supercharged whine, I couldn't hear the belt squeal anyways. So Then the supercharger decided to break, and now it's getting repaired. So that's that.